The Giant Killers by Conway Fitzgerald. Chapter 13.
In the desperate hours after the battle, as the human heroes scattered the rest of Quell's undead army into the countryside, where some would lurk for years to come, Fergos was lifted to safety. He was carried by a horse-drawn cart back to his quarters. He was still and unconscious as he was returned to his bed, where he clung to life. All the initial attempts to heal the wound dealt by the Scorn Scepter had failed. The wound seemed impervious to divine intervention. As soon as it was closed, the gaping wound would then reopen again. His faithful prayed around him, and ever more followers gathered outside of his adopted home to pay homage. All the while, Fergos traveled further in spirit than any man could ever venture in flesh. His first sight was of the battlefield. He could now see everything happening below at once, as if he were an enormous white eagle flying ever higher above the fray. His arms were extended out and then transformed into large white wings, catching thermals effortlessly. His ascent continued until all of the chaos and noise of the battlefield below grew silent, and all that remained was his flight upwards through an endless sea of clouds. At last, in the distance, he saw the Hall of the Gods. It was a massive, gleaming castle city that seemed perched upon the clouds themselves, or perhaps the highest mountain peak. Its foundation could not be seen due to the obscurity of the clouds. Its massive spires reached upwards as if melded into the golden sun itself. Fergos flew towards the highest spire, which called on him in song, like a child might be summoned by his mother to return home after playing outside. As Fergos reached the face of the highest spire, his two wings split and became four. His great white wingspan transformed into two separate black ravens, and he flew into the Hall of the Gods on either side of its massive tower, as his one spirit had now become two. Fergos was now separated of mind and memory, those thoughts which occurred to him, and the memories of those things he had witnessed and experienced. Together they formed one mind. Apart and on high, they informed the All-Father of what had transpired upon our world, quite objectively. Each of the ravens perched itself upon opposite shoulders of the All-Father.
Tell me, my children, what have you seen?
Into his right ear, Fergos whispered all he had seen, and in the All-Father's left ear, all he thought that it meant. The ravens that were Fergos made no demands. They simply served and obeyed, bearing witness as commanded. Fergos' spirit felt no emotion. He simply stated fact, and opined without prejudice of what he believed these facts meant for the world below. The All-Father nodded his head.
Good. Well done, my sons. Return and see more.
The All-Father then lifted himself from his golden throne, and the ravens withdrew from his broad shoulders. Their wings fluttered briskly, which lifted them upwards into the bright light, which passed through the high stone crenels where the two ravens entered, and now each departed. Once outside, the two ravens became one again, and Fergos's full conscience was returned. His ascent also continued. Untethered by the rules of physical matter, Fergos floated outwards into the vast expanse of endless space. He required no breath and felt no effect of the cold, dark, star-filled vacuum. As he ventured deeper into the cosmos, moving faster than can be measured, the distant gleam of Valhalla dimmed into one tiny star among many. The great seer finally reached the outer limits of all existence, and from this celestial perch, he could see the entire tree of life before him. Its massive roots drew cosmic gases and transformed them into life-giving waters that flowed through its limitless roots, replenishing all the countless worlds it held aloft. Fergos could see all the known worlds, and all of the infinite, unknown worlds beyond them, within its span. It became clear to the Great Seer that our known world was just one tiny speck encircled by infinity. Its place was in the middle of incalculable other worlds, those watched, and even those unseen by the gods themselves. Our known world was once just like my mother Gael, an empty virgin world, there for the taking. First it was taken by the giants. It was their world to rule alone for many centuries. They had conquered it by being the strongest and fiercest of creatures, and the savviest of all the monsters. They then shared it with the dwarves, who offered them skilled craftsmanship, which greatly exceeded their own. They could control the little dwarves, so they welcomed them within their newly conquered world as servants. Their strong little hands fashioned the giants' weapons and constructed their many massive castles. Then with time, the giants' taste for finer things grew, and they allowed the elves to come and live among them as well. The wood and mountain elves wove fine clothes and fermented tasty wines and ales to their liking. Their green fields offered fine grazing lands for the beasts that fed their huge bellies. They then invited the halflings to tend those flocks, to cull and deliver the meat and harvest the fields. The giants' rule on our world was complete and unchallenged for many centuries. But as the dwarves, elves, and halflings' numbers grew, the giants decided they needed ways to stem the tide of their growing populations. So they then invited the lesser giants, the trolls, ogres, and the most vicious and hideous humanoids, orcs, goblins, gnolls, and others, to hunt and feed upon them. However, these humanoids became harder for them to control. They expanded even more quickly and thwarted the will of the Giant King by consuming his food stocks and bringing much unwanted chaos into his worldly kingdom. It was only then the giants invited the humans. The humans offered to control the humanoids in exchange for land to tend in peace. However, the humans were surprisingly fierce and clever. They reproduced just as quickly as the other humanoids, but were much smarter and capable of survival in all climates. Their gods were the most powerful of deities, aiding them in spirit, and always granting them with the best chances of fate. Soon the giants found this world was in danger of being taken over by the rapid expanse of mankind. The dwarves did not aid the giants in fighting the humans, but instead joined with them in an effort to make themselves free. They taught the humans how to forge the finest steel. The elves, still angered by the vicious horde that the giants released upon them, also stopped providing aid and comfort to the giants, and instead joined forces with the humans, teaching them in the ways of magic. Soon the giants were nearly destroyed, drawn back to the far edge of the world. It was only then, as the humans turned on one another, that they found a time and place of solitude. There they hid themselves and lay in wait for their chance to restore their rule upon this world once again. That is when the Dark Elves of Doiki saw their opportunity to gain their own revenge on their elvish cousins by using the clumsy brawn of the unsuspecting giants. They did not want this world for their own. They wished only revenge, and that their cousins of Alfheimir be sent back to their own world forever. The Doiki elves, also called Drow, could then be free to pluck and plunder from this world as they saw fit, without any interference. All of this history, both ancient and recent, became obvious to Fergos as he drifted weightlessly in space, observing the Tree of Life. It was knowledge not learned by way of spoken word, chiseled tablet, or ancient ink scroll. It was awareness that came to him by way of true sight, the perception of truth. He had indeed evolved into the Great Seer, as had been foretold. He had been fated to see this, and all of that knowledge was given back selflessly, without vice or gain, to the All-Father. Fergos then looked beneath the deep roots of the Tree of Life. He now wished to understand the darkness that had nearly consumed him. There below all worlds, in a shadow realm, he saw the darkness he once feared. As he studied it, he descended, drawing his essence closer and closer to it, until he found himself in it and among it. He floated like a firefly in the dark night. He flew closer to the pit that housed the Demogorgon Moscal. His light attracted the attention of all the miscreants beneath, including the Dark One himself. Moscal opened his mouth, and his tongue lashed out like a frog, capturing Fergos's light essence and drawing him into his mouth. Yet just like the sea dragon, Moscal could not digest his pure goodness and spit him out onto the rocky hell pit that was his domain.
What are you? How is it you come here, but I cannot consume your soul?
Fergos did not speak, but instead gazed at him with eyes longing knowledge, truth, and justice. Like a bubble deep beneath the ocean, Fergos saw how a single light, so inserted into this dark underworld, could illuminate so much that the evildoers preferred to keep hidden. There was so much to be gained by having such an agent of light, embedded as he was, within the very housings of the evil ones. Moscal felt exposed to the gods, as if Fergos acted as a beacon where the eyes of the immortals could now see plainly all Moscal's hidden domain and all of its many secrets. Fergos had been drawn under by the actions of Moscal's high priest, Quell. Moscal lamented granting him the favors he asked.
Go back to your world. Return to your pain.
Scolded Moscal. His fiery eyes flared as he extended his demonic claws. As he thrust outwards, he forced Fergos' spirit away, like an irresistible deep-sea current. As he was flushed away, the pain returned to Fergos' abdomen. At first it was a dull pain, a subtle reminder that something bad had happened. Then it swelled within, just like the feeling he had while he prayed at Voss. It became a churning pit of fear and foreboding in his torso. It gathered his innards with the grip of a giant octopus, attaching to many points at once, all pulling, drawing life, and causing great pain. It was consuming him alive. He cried out and opened his eyes.
High Priest! He lives!
Said Reggie, who had been at his bedside, trying his best to bring comfort to his suffering. He could see Fergos was in great pain. Fergos had much to tell, but he could not speak. Much to Theb's dismay, I elected to return to Melandon after Nuna released us from her Woods Form incantation. When I learned of Fergos's great injury, I rushed to see him, but the camp had now become crowded with many humans of great power. At that point, I had no idea where they had come from. I was received by Khan and Theos, who explained to me that Fergos had been struck by the Scorn Scepter. Its evil powers, which brought great suffering, included the power of withering the body beyond healing. With the combined healing arts of all the great human clerics present, Fergos held on, but did not have long to live. His intestines continued to wither away even after they were healed. It seemed there was nothing more these many priests could do, unless a way could be found to counteract this demonic effect. He was certain to perish. Instinctively, I set out to find Gareth. I wasn't certain why he came to my mind, but none of these humans had the answer. Because I had dismissed him and taken his financial offering so rudely, I wasn't sure if he'd still offer me the same gentle smile. Because Nuna reclaimed her archers rather sternly and gave me a vaguely hostile warning of unwelcome in her domain, I figured she wasn't interested in helping me any further. So I used magic flight to soar over the western Ostrom, that valley of fields, rivers, and mills, to the northwest I had once called home. I called out Gareth's name desperately, like a bird's call high above. I felt the futility of my search when I observed the old mill by the river, the same one I used to call home. I hadn't been there since I was a child. Of course, it was rebuilt several times and had several different owners since I left, but it still occupied the same footprint, performed the same utility, and evoked the same memories. I flew down into the woods nearby and then made my way on foot. There was no one there. It too had been abandoned after the raids last summer. I undid the boarded doors that locked the humble shack that I stayed in with my mother Gail. It was so meager, I couldn't imagine how I ever felt comfort in that place. It looked like a nest meant for heifers, not a woman and her young daughter. As I looked at that place, I cried. My eyes welled with tears for my mother and all her needless suffering.
Why do you cry, child?
Asked Gareth. It is a weakness I have. I care. I love. I regret. I am human, I responded, staring blankly at the barren, dirty shelter.
It is a strength, not a weakness, Aermine. Your coming was not an accident. You were chosen.
But she wasn't. My eyes welled with tears as I was overcome with emotion. She was an innocent girl that was raped and her life stolen from her. Gareth looked at me with solemnity.
She was given you. You made her very happy.
He smiled. She was cursed. She was cast out for having a fatherless child that no one wanted. A beast that belonged nowhere. But here, in this barn. I collapsed onto my ass and threw my hands over my reddened face. I could not restrain the tremendous flow of tears that followed. I came out here, saddened and desperate over the suffering of Fergos. I sought a way to heal his deep, incurable injury and ease his suffering, only to find my own emotional suffering, which remained with me forever, due to my own deep wound that could never be healed. Gareth stood behind me and placed his thin, elvish fingers on my shoulders, attempting to console me.
Your father would be proud of you,
Gareth said clumsily, as if the words had no meaning in his own culture. He felt badly for his part in the breeding after the Zolti massacre. It was he that found Gael and guided Puale to her. But he acted on orders of my father, understanding, of course, the desperate nature of their situation. But Gareth knew now, no matter what that situation demanded, from a moral perspective, it was terribly wrong. As I matured, I learned to accept that even the most just war would bring collateral damage and great suffering to the innocent. So it was for Gael's joy to be sacrificed, and I made to be their prophesied restorer. Somehow, in order to truly win me over, he needed to offer some recompense, to appeal to my human side, and for his own conscience. He needed to repay something to me, something much more than a chest of gold and jewels, something his elvish heart was incapable of showing. Fergos, he's the only father I've ever known. He accepted me when the others would not. He saved Dan's life when no one else could. And he brought so much hope to these people. And now, no one can help him as he withers away in pain.
Perhaps I can. It is a withering magic, you say.
With that, I grabbed hold of his hand and pulled myself up to him. Though I intended to plead from a more respectful position below, my human height caused me to look down on him a bit. Can you? If so, we must hurry.
I am not certain, but there is an ancient druidic withering incantation. It is powerful, affecting the limbs of many trees. It could be used on living entrails, and perhaps it could be reversed.
Yes! You can do it! I knew it! My tear-filled eyes sparkled as I smiled at the possibility. Gareth had a look of caution on his face, but he was obliged to try. He knew how much it meant to me.
Have him brought to Tel Suma. I will need the aid of my greatest and wisest. I will try, Aermine. Just know, if there is even a chance, it will not be easy.
Bring him? A human? To Tel Suma? Nuna just told me I needed to stay away.
I'll handle her.
Gareth smiled. That seemed good enough reassurance for me. As I flew away at top speed towards Milandon, it occurred to me that I would have a much harder time convincing the humans there to allow me to take Fergos's body than Gareth would convincing Nuna to allow me to bring him there, to Tel Suma. I had Dan's trust unquestionably. Fergos had faith in me and was the highest in the order among them. But apart from that remained his cautious ranger, skeptical paladins, and ever-dubious wizards. Khan and Theos were studying diligently, traveling to and from Are and Chalpachare, seeking advice and knowledge from the greatest of mages and the library of Armesh. They were running out of possibilities. I was so happy I spent those last few hours with them the days prior. They agreed to hear me out.
An anti-withering magic? I have never heard of such a thing,
said Theos.
It's not a magic spell. It's a druidic art. Has to do with the withering of tree limbs, woods and such.
Khan and Theos both looked unconvinced.
Why cannot this druid fly here? Fergos is in critical condition. He should not be moved.
Khan added. They both paused, then said no more. They turned back to their books.
If he stays here, he dies,
I demanded.
Now, unless you have some kind of remedy in that book, a scroll or magic potion, somewhere in that magic bag of tricks that can fix him.
They didn't, and the thought of Fergos dying really struck home hard. Perhaps I spoke with more conviction than I deserved, but I truly believed that somehow Gareth could help him. The mages looked at me, stammering, both calculating thousands of possibilities as quickly as they could. They were impressed by my measure of urgency, and they knew I truly cared about Fergos.
You had both better help me get him on his way, now.
How? He would never survive a trip of that distance on these rocky roads. There are still droves of undead lurking about these lands,
Theos warned.
He would need to be teleported, but we need to know where, precisely,
Khan proffered. But of course, that would be a huge problem. For not only was Tel Suma a completely secret woodland fortress, even I had never really seen a way in nor out. I had only seen the throne room and foyer before I was once again blindfolded and expelled after my first clumsy visit. They noticed my reticence.
Where exactly is this place you speak of?
Khan asked. I don't know, I answered meagerly.
What do you mean, you don't know? Where were you intending to cart him off to?
Theos became impatient.
It's a secret elvish fortress in the woods. I've been there, but I can't take you. I've been invited back, sort of.
Theos huffed and sat down on his rocking chair. He was unconvinced my scheme had any merit. There had to be a remedy they could find if they persisted. Khan kept his eyes on me as he strategized thoughtfully.
Perhaps it would be best to see if we can find a neutral place for this meeting to occur first. If you're certain these healers will not come here, we could negotiate, offer them some compensation.
I exhaled in exasperation.
They don't want money. It's complicated. All I know is he is dying. It must happen soon, and it must happen there. That is what the healer told me. But if you do not know where it is, or even how to describe it, how will we put him there?
The answer was obvious to me.
My friend, the Grey Elf?
I told them, or more like, asked them.
The brigand? The rogue? Who kills in the shadows for profit?
Theos scoffed.
You're telling us only he knows the way.
Theos looked at Khan with great suspicion. Placing the great seer into the hands of an elvish assassin didn't seem at all plausible.
And where is he?
Asked Khan. Again, I did not know the answer. Theb had left me to join Nuna. He was not pleased with me, and had very little to say before he left. And I surmised, even if he was here, right now, there was no way he would agree to teleport the Great Seer into that place he pledged his life would never be seen by human eyes. That version of events wasn't going to happen, and I knew it.
I've seen it. I've witnessed the place he must be brought. I remember it clearly.
I offered fearfully. Both mages looked at each other, then at the bedridden Fergos, then back at me.
Do you intend to port him there yourself?
Theos asked incredulously. The three of us had spoken about this topic many times at length. Teleportation was a magic I had yet to even try to perform, let alone master. I was terrified of it. At that point, it was beyond my realm of wizardry, but given the circumstances, I felt a surge of desperate confidence. I felt I was a good enough study and a competent enough magic user to pull it off.
Yes, let me do it. Construct a scroll for me to use. Show me how. Let me save him.
I begged.
You can take